Good afternoon, everybody. This is Frankie here with an update on what's going on with the debt limit ceiling negotiations here, and we have come to a deal finally. Compromise has been made here on both sides, Democrats and Republicans here, and there's going to be a House vote here coming up on Wednesday, so pay close attention. If this passes, it'll head to the Senate. If it passes after that, it'll head to the president's desk. We have about 1 week to do this. Has to be done by June 5th, which is the date that the government is expected to completely run out of funds. And if for some reason this does not pass, and isn't able to get signed by Biden in time, and we default, that would be the first time that ever happened, and it would have detrimental consequences to the economy. So I'm going to take you to some news here on what's going on and show you the latest information. So thanks for watching, and everybody stay tuned to my channel for latest information.
We begin with a new debt ceiling agreement reached over the weekend. Lawmakers are meeting tomorrow to discuss the deal struck between President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. The House Rules Committee now must adopt a rule to allow the so-called Fiscal Responsibility Act to be approved by the House. The committee has a 9-4 Republican majority. And among the members, 2 from the House Freedom Caucus who have publicly criticized the debt limit agreement. Well, the schedule for default now stands at less than a week. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen revised our nation's estimate. The U.S. potential default date now stands at June 5th. Yellen extended the deadline from June 1st based on what she described as, quote, the most recent available data. Well, joining us now from Capitol Hill is CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane. Scott, I understand you've been spending your Memorial Day weekend reading this bill. Tell us, what are the key provisions?
Hey, Lana, this is a great idea for everybody. Take this 99-page bill and bring it to the pool and do some heavy reading today. It'll bring joy to your day and joy to your life.
And the family loves that too, right?
And everybody would love to see you reading that versus playing with the kids or playing in the beach. Let's look at the bottom line of the bill. It extends the debt ceiling through 2025. That date is not trivial. It pushes it back past the next presidential election. Everybody involved doesn't have to touch this thing again until after the next election. It likely would raise the debt ceiling by multiple trillions of dollars in the process. There are some components, though, in this suspension of the debt limit that are going to be trouble on the U.S. House floor as early as Wednesday. First of all, for Democrats, they have grave concerns, they tell me, about this tightening of requirements or eligibility standards for some social safety net programs. Think about food stamps and assistance for those who need help to afford and buy food. That's going to be trouble. It also prevents cuts to things that might cause even more trouble. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the military, and veterans programs. It does take back billions of dollars for the IRS, money that was just approved for a backlogged Internal Revenue Service for 2024 and 2025. Pulls back some of the unspent COVID money. That has not been a political wedge issue, but those bottom two sure have. Not just the work requirements for social programs, but Lana, as we read through this nearly 100-page bill, nearly a quarter of it, 25 pages, loosens environmental rules, changes the permitting process for major programs, including major construction and environmental projects. That's going to be a thorny issue when this gets to the House floor later this week.
Well, Scott, Speaker McCarthy is aiming to have the House vote on this deal Wednesday. I want to play some sound of him and also his Democratic counterpart, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, speaking yesterday. They say that this agreement has enough bipartisan support to pass the House.
I do hope and expect to see a significant number of House Republicans voting for this agreement. It's my understanding that they are committed to producing at least 150 votes, if not more. I do expect that there will be Democratic support once we have the ability to actually be fully briefed by the White House, but I'm not going to predict what those numbers may ultimately look like.
I think you're going to get a majority of Republicans voting for this bill. This is a good bill for the American public. The president agreed with this bill, so I think there's going to be a lot of Democrats that go vote for it, too.
So, Scott, how many defectors is each party willing to lose?
Oh, they're going to have to lose some based on what we've heard so far over the past 24 hours. Some number of House Freedom Caucus members, the more conservative members of the House Republican Conference, have been particularly vocal on social media today and yesterday, saying that this doesn't cut enough spending. This doesn't make enough of a dent in the deficit to warrant their votes. Members of the House Progressive Caucus haven't been saying, no, we're not going to vote for it, but they sure have been unequivocal that they have concerns about those social safety net program changes and the environmental permitting changes. They're going to lose on either side. But the bottom line at this moment, Lana, is there's a soft deadline and a firm deadline. The firm deadline is clear. This has to happen by June 5th. Or we risk economic catastrophe in America. But the softer deadline might be more important. A vote is tentatively scheduled for Wednesday or expected Wednesday. If that slides, this gets more fragile and this gets more tenuous. Time is the enemy on difficult pieces of legislation. The longer you give it, the more bandwidth you give it, the more likely it is people go from yes to no. So they got to get this thing to a vote in the minds of some of the supporters by Wednesday. If it doesn't go Wednesday, it gets more fragile. And oh, by the way, the stock market will most certainly react to that.
Yeah, and it still actually has to pass the House and then go to the Senate. Does it face an uphill battle there?
Just as narrow a trajectory in the Senate. Now, Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, the two leaders in the Senate, have both indicated their support of what's come down the pike. That certainly helps get to the 60 votes needed in the Senate, not 50, but 60. But there are going to be any number of opponents to this bill in the Senate. There's already been one Republican in the U.S. Senate who said he intends to try to employ some parliamentary procedures or maneuvers to slow this down. That's tricky because the clock is running against everybody here in Congress. The Senate gets second shot at this. The House will go first, potentially as early as Wednesday, which means the Senate could be voting on this by Friday or next weekend. The House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, has returned here to the U.S. Capitol today, Lana. He's still working this. I see a lot of staff going in and out of the House Republican Whip's office. There's clearly meetings going on. I will tell you, though, I think it's important to note I'm the only one wearing a tie.
Right. Scott McFarlane on Capitol Hill. Thank you. And I think you can lose the tie. You look good either way, sir.
Thank you, Lana.
And fresh off of that tentative debt ceiling agreement with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, President Biden observed Memorial Day at Arlington National Cemetery. Mr. Biden laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier before making some remarks. I want to bring in now CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. She's following all of this from the White House for us. Weijia, let's begin with that very pressing debt ceiling agreement. How is the White House responding to criticism from progressive Democrats over the work requirements for government assistance programs and the spending cap that's included in the debt ceiling deal? Oh, not to mention some of their concerns about the environmental protections that they were hoping for.
Well, those concerns are very real, and the White House is aware that those concerns could translate into a problem for them when it comes to voting. Just as Scott was laying out with a portion of Republicans, the same is true for the Progressive Caucus, the leaders of which have made very clear that, they're not sure whether their caucus, whether some other even moderate Democrats will be on board to pass this bill. So this is where the real work happens, where amendments happen, where discussions happen, and where a lot of push and pull happens on behalf of the White House to try to convince the Democratic Party to be on board. But the message from here is that think about the alternative. I think that, we've heard from several senior administration officials, including the budget director herself, Shalanda Young, who says, look, we had to come to an agreement. Both sides had to give a little bit in order to reach the most important part of this agreement, which was to prevent a default. And I think that's what you will hear a lot of. But in terms of, those very specific concerns like work requirements, it's something that the president will probably have to have a lot of conversations about. We know he's already spoken to the leader of the Progressive Caucus, Congresswoman Jayapal, about this. And, I think that he's going to have to say this is the best compromise that we could come to, because the good news is that there were no work requirement expansions for people on Medicaid, which was a big concern. And so I think, what you'll hear is that, yes, we didn't get exactly what we wanted, but we were able to preserve a lot of the protections in place, even when it comes to pieces of the climate proposal that you mentioned.
Well, Weijia, is there significance to the fact that this is a 2-year deal and then President Biden is not going to have to deal with raising the debt ceiling until after the next election. Does that help Democrats as the White House is trying to maneuver that?
Well, that is the hope, Lana, and that's exactly why the timeline is as it is. I mean, we don't have an exact date and year from the White House as far as when that, extension will expire. The most important part is that it would go through the 2024 presidential election, because this has been a pretty ugly fight for both sides, for President Biden and for Speaker McCarthy to have to do this in public, and they didn't want to go through that again. They didn't want to have to deal with another potential default, especially on the heels of a presidential election, when I imagine the main concern is going to be the economy, and that's really what's going to drive the election. So it's just one less thing that they have to worry about as the president tries to keep his place here at the White House.
All right, Weijia, thank you.
You're welcome.